I wouldn't describe the film as an action film. It's a quest movie. If that is a genre, I will call it a quest movie. And then after that, Lord of the Rings and some other movies of that nature came out.
The way that worked is the way it often works in Hollywood. There was a book, there was Eaters of the Dead. I knew Michael Crichton's work real well. I was a fan of Crichton's. I'm still reading on his stuff.
I think I read it when it came out, which was, wow, a long time ago. It was probably in the 1970s sometime, wasn't it? I read it when it came out, and I was always curious about it. I thought it had a problem to work as a story. It's interesting. I should have paid attention to my first intuition. I thought it had a problem because the monsters weren't serious enough, and in the end they didn't do anything. The ending was kind of it was not quite serious or scary enough. So then I came up with this idea that, wait, if I make the people that who are attacking them, if I make them truly not human and physically very scary, well, then the story gets a lot better. And I started to prepare it that way. And I got Disney to back it, to buy it and prepare a screenplay. But then Michael Crichton didn't like the idea that the creatures that were attacking them were slightly fantastic. That they were, truly primitive wild men. He liked the scientifically more accurate notion that Neanderthals probably are. You wouldn't be able to tell them between them and modern human beings. If you saw them on a bus, you wouldn't notice the difference. That was his premise, and scientifically, he's right.
And I was the first writer on it. John and I worked very closely on that draft, on a daily basis. And we had our draft. This film that you see, I'm proud to say, is, with adjustments, the script that I'd recognize. Bill came on later. I moved on to another project, and Bill's a very accomplished, very skilled writer and poet, I think, in his own way.
The ending of the movie, as I'd intended it, was the ending out of Zulu, where they fight and fight and fight, and they fight all night long, and the bodies are piled up all around them, and there's only like 4 guys left alive, and it's Stanley Baker and some old Afrikaner guy. Anyway, the Zulus come up, and they come back to the top of the hill, and there's 1 million of them. They're everywhere. And they start making this weird noise. And Stanley Baker starts yelling at them, saying, "Isn't enough? Come down here and kill us already. You're going to win. It's all right. Kill us. Stop torturing us." And the old Afrikaner in the back starts laughing and says, "You crazy fool, they're saluting you." I don't know. I always thought that was just the greatest ending. And that was the ending that we wrote for. That was the way this was supposed to end. That the Neanderthals fight and fight and fight, and the bodies, and there's only there's very few people left alive, and then Neanderthals start chanting something from the hillsides, and it's the same chant that the guys had heard down in the cave. And I was going to have Ibn, who was the cultured, educated man, I was going to give him the line of, "No, they're not they're not taunting you, they're saluting you." Anyway, Michael didn't like that ending. He was a consultant all the way through, and he had veto rights. on just about everything.
It's over.
One of the major purposes of cinema is to see and imagine what a time and place was like. So it's probably like why I like John Ford's films more than anything else. I mean, they're lovely dramas, and they're very entertaining, but our history, for most of us, our history was taught to us by those movies. What did people look like in the Old West? How did they behave? What was important? What did they think about? What did they try to do? That history all comes from the movies. And I've always thought that was one of the primary purposes of the movies, was to make it, to fill in the blanks about where we came from and what were people like.
So it's very, very exciting. And the whole notion of, and this was John's phrasing, I think, of a modern urban man in that environment. It's absolutely fascinating. That's Ibn Fadlan was conceived as a modern, urban, somewhat bemused, put upon, wisecracking. There were drafts of the script that had more wisecracks.
I liked the idea that the hero was an Arab, and that he was portrayed as an intelligent, well-educated, highly cultured man, a highly civilized man. So in essence, I was going to have the Arab be a modern American. That was the idea.
She will travel with him. You will not see this again. It is the old way.
I wanted to do it with Michael Keaton because he's very, very funny. And I wanted him to play it essentially as an American with so he'd get next to this big Viking guy and, he'd play the humor in it. My intention was that going into it, I wanted it a lot broader than that. I wanted to carry a comic thread right through it. Michael Keaton did a big movie that Disney had spent a lot of money on. I don't remember what it was. And it came out just as I was trying to cast this. And Disney said, no, can't make the movie with him.
He sent me the script, and suddenly I like very much the character of Dennis, Herger, I think it was called, and I loved it, and I said, this is kind of the hero that I would love to play. Maybe because I was too taken by Zorro. Actually, they were pretty open about the possibility. They didn't have the other actor yet, and they were pretty open actually to offer me one of those characters. And I think some of the producers said to me, picked the one that you like. And then we had this conversation in LA, and he ended up convincing me that the Arab guy was quite more interesting because he was kind of in an initiation process. He's going to live an adventure that is going to change actually his soul and the way that he understands lives, through the whole entire adventure. And so the way that he explained that to me was kind of nice, and I said, okay, I'll buy it, and I did it.
I'm very proud of being associated with the only major American action movie in the late talking era to have a Muslim hero. It's true that we don't have a Muslim hero, a prayerful Muslim hero, but we also don't have a prayerful Christian hero. We don't have prayerful Jews. We don't have prayerful Hindus. This is something that we don't touch. We don't touch faith in movies.
And I don't know if you remember the scene in which he prays right on the ground. It's raining, and these creatures are coming from the mountains, and he prays almost like a final prayer. I remember that he was saying something like, for the beautiful things that I could have said and I never said, the beautiful things that I could have done and I never did. It was something like that. It was like a litany that he was saying. So he accepted death, and from that moment on, he became a warrior. He just decided to confront whatever comes, take the sword, and he actually ended up being one of them. He ended up being a Viking. But it's true that at the beginning, more than intellectual, is that he recognized himself as a little bit superior to these people, these barbarians from the north of Europe, in a time in which actually he's coming from a place in which they were using forks, and these people are eating with their hands. And it's just it was the reverse of culturally of what probably is today. And so the guy feels a little bit arrogant. I don't think he was so intelligent, but he feels superior. And that gives him a little bit of arrogance. He's going to pay for that because he's going to realize little by little that these guys, they know more than they seem to know about life and about things, about relationships. It's just the rituals that they are following are completely different to the things that he was accustomed to.
It is a frequent technique to use a main character who's very much like us, and to let him see this strange world through his eyes and let him have reactions that are similar to us. So we're not men of action. We live in the Galleria. We go to the supermarket. What would it be like to be with people like that? So if you create a character who is similar to us and goes to this strange place, then he can have our reaction, he can have our questions, and he can say things that he can translate for us. Mm-hmm. It's a technique, that's all. It's a dramatic technique.
All I know is the amount of quality that was involved in the shooting of the movie. The search for something different in the mind of John McTiernan, and that started with the use of real actors from the north of Europe. I mean, what we call real Vikings. He didn't accept the possibility of working with actors from Hollywood to do all those characters, so he did a very strong cast in the north of Europe with Norwegians, Swedish people. So they brought all these real actors with real accents from the north of Europe.
I just moved to Los Angeles, and I had an agent who was lazy, so I fired my agent. I had nobody. And a week later, the agent calls and says, yeah, there's some horror movie called Eaters of the Dead. They want some, they want some big Nordic actors. So I went, and I had no idea it was a John McTiernan picture. They were very secretive about it. I had no idea it was a Michael Crichton novel. And so they just gave me a little piece to read, and it was really well written, maybe by that gentleman who just walked out. And I did that piece. I waited 3 months, and then they called. And they said, John McTiernan wants to meet you. He never meets with anybody, but he wants to meet with you. So I met with John. I was not the first choice. The studio didn't want me. Michael Crichton didn't want me. The only person who wanted me was McTiernan. They wanted Stellan Skarsgård, the Swedish actor. And so they casted first in LA, then in New York, then in Sweden, Stockholm, Toronto and Vancouver. And then they came back to me 4 months later and gave me the role. As far as the rest of the guys, they did most of the casting in London and in Scandinavia because they wanted that quality, either British or Nordic, Scandinavian. And McTiernan never met anybody except for me because I was in Los Angeles. He didn't meet Dennis Storhoy, who played that other wonderful role, Herger. He didn't meet any of the other characters. And I remember when we all ended up in Canada for the first night to get to know each other, it was the first time he saw all of the 13 actors. So it was pretty. And he was happy. I was watching his face because he said, I'm really nervous what these guys are really like, because I'm just picking them off of tapes from around the world. And these guys were fantastic, you know.
They all were huge. You know, it was, for me, it was like making a movie with Los Angeles Lakers. These people were enormous.
They wanted big actors around Banderas to show the contrast between the Norseman and the Arab. And he had absolutely no problem playing the little guy around big guys. Whereas usually if I, you know, deal with the Hollywood actors who are kind of not very tall, they're not very comfortable around people, you know, over 5 feet tall. And it's a little challenging, but Banderas doesn't care.
Put your hand down, little brother.
I believe they watch us, even now.
If we chase,
They melt.
will they come to us?
Farmers say they come with a mist.
We were there together for a month before we started the shoot. We learned archery, you know, fencing, swordsmanship, riding. Nobody could ride. I couldn't. I never rode before. If you look at the film, you still can tell I can't ride. And Norwegian. And I actually did a Norwegian character on the X-Files TV show. So I knew enough Norwegian. So I didn't go to Norwegian class, I went to the bar.
It was hard. Those movies are hard. The people may think that they are not, but they are. You know, we didn't use so much stands, I mean, for horses and stuff like that. We pretty much did everything ourselves. That's another thing that John wanted. He did a big training with us. I remember they had arenas there in Canada prepared for us to ride the horses, ride with our hands, stuff like that. He wanted us to be very skillful and to shoot as much the actors as he could. As camels, we were riding camels too. Sometimes I did with, that was quite beautiful, a scene that I did with Omar Sharif. And I was riding this camel and we were talking about Lawrence of Arabia. And I saw him in that camel, dressed as an Arab, and he was dressed as an Arab, and I was looking at him and thinking, oh my God, I'm shooting this guy. I remember watching this movie when I was a little kid, you know, Lawrence of Arabia, and I am here with the actor. I cannot believe it. And he just sensed that I was just thinking that. And he looked at me, and we were not using sound in the scene, and we were in the camelback and action, and he looked at me and says, Aqaba. I just love that.
First time I saw Omar, he was getting off a camel. And I was going, my God, it's Dr. Zhivago. And I'm looking at him, and he gets off, he walks towards me, and he gives me the double kiss, you know, because I think he's Lebanese. And he goes, you know, the last time I was on a camel was 30 years ago. Meaning Lawrence of Arabia. And that's the first thing he said to me. And the interesting thing he told me was, in Lawrence of Arabia, he wore black, O'Toole wore white, and McTiernan had told him that we're going to switch it. Banderas will wear black, and Omar will wear white.
I'm the link between our hero and the Vikings we meet, because they have no common language. And this man that I portray is someone with some culture, who speaks languages, and therefore tried to communicate with the Vikings first in Greek, and he didn't get anywhere. Then he tried Latin, and he found one of them who spoke Latin, and therefore for the first contact between Antonio and the Vikings is through the translation of this character of mine.
Sån här är vår problem. Vill ha slippeland och snake up to steal teeth of 12 horses. Så kommer det bästa, så kommer det bästa. Då han ville gå, ropte han to them.
I wanted them to be foreign when we first saw them. I wanted them to be, okay, this bunch of weird guys comes walking up, and they got horns coming out of all this stuff. Well, if they walk up and they sound like you met them at the Galleria, they're not all that strange. If I could have them speaking a foreign language that no one around understands, and I come to them over the shoulder of the well-educated, cultured Arab who sees these bunch of strange guys, and gradually as he studies, as he learns more about them, he learns to understand what they say. I wanted the audience to feel that they had learned to speak Norwegian with him.
And then I realized it was very, very smart, because not only was it about learning the language, it's very, very efficient way of showing passage of time, building a relationship, and just in terms of page count, not even a page. In terms of screen time, what, 40 seconds or something? Brilliant.
I tried to make the cinema very realistic and mundane. I tried to use very long, sustained shots and to give you the feeling that you were actually there. I probably did not have the aesthetic courage to follow through all the way and make it all visually boring. So I cheated. You know, it's very hard to make it exciting if you use long, sustained, realistic shots. It's hard to make it exciting. So now and then you have to, I couldn't follow through with that aesthetic commandment. I had to cheat because, after all, you know, this is a children's movie. It should be fun and exciting, and there's only so far you can take those ideas. So I would go back and forth, and sometimes I would try to make it very mundane and realistic, because there was some realistic thing that I wanted, the point I wanted to get across. And then other times I had no scruples, and I would, you know, make it just as exciting as I could.
Working for John is very rewarding, because it's like we shot most of the film, most of the first unit would only be with one camera. Like a lot of times we'd have, like, for that horse riding scene, we had maybe 2 or 3 cameras, but John really only focuses on his one camera. He has a philosophy that there is only one place where the camera should be to tell his story. John and I just don't like cluttered sets. We like simple, like my style is pretty simple in my lighting. And we just want it to be as simple as him. Like, so if there was firelight, we'd use firelight. You know, if we're in the forest, we'd use just the natural light. Maybe put some smoke to help us with the contrast, but it was quite a simple approach. In like a Hollywood movie, you want to see a lot of depth, but like see down a street for blocks and blocks and blocks. So we have to light that for blocks and blocks and blocks. In 13th Warrior, we were very happy just to light our little camp world and let the rest just fall off naturally. It was a much more natural approach to lighting than some of the other films I've done, where we did want to see for miles and miles and miles. It's just the fire became almost a character. We had the actors, we'd give them their own little flaming torch, and they could work out how to light themselves. So if they put it down there, they'd look very good. So they all learnt very quickly how to make themselves look good.
I work on the things I want to see. So in this case, I wanted to do a Viking movie. It was enormously important to me, the idea of Norway 1,000 years ago was a pine forest. You know, it was an enormous empty pine forest. Europe, this is what Europe looked like 1,000 years ago. It was nothing. That was hugely important to me. Probably more so than some of the plot.
The main location was chosen by John McTiernan, who had come there 2 years before, because he did a very extensive location research. I think he even went to Norway or somewhere in Scandinavia. But he realized apparently that up there it was too civilized. I mean, nothing like this was left. And the place he picked, actually, on Vancouver Island, has still the old forest, huge, huge forests, and a lot of pine trees and a lot of, anyway, very mysterious. It's a country full of wood. So he found a place because we needed a huge area where to build the actual Great Hall and the village for the Vikings.
If they really did a village of the time, it was not a scenography. You can literally live there. You know, the cabanas, everything that they built was real. The movie is just 14 years old, but today movies are not done like that anymore. They use a lot of CGI that we didn't use so much in the movie, exception with some waves when they are traveling on the boat. That is the only exception, and we shot that in a studio with a mobile platform to move the boats and stuff like that. But the rest of the things are real.
It was perfect because especially when he stood up where we filmed the Great Hall, where we built the Great Hall, and the village, you can see that marvelous shot. You also see the bay. You see the water down below on one side, and obviously to the side where the Wendels come with the mountains. You see all that in one sweep. You can get all that in. So it was all, it worked all very well. But of course we had other locations too. We shot on the Fraser River. We shot in the middle of the forest. I built a farmstead in the middle of the forest. We built another village on a waterfall with a cave entrance, which was at Elk Bay. But most of the stuff was shot on Vancouver Island. And the forests are just absolutely incredible. I mean, the Indians are still there. I used a lot of the Indians for the cruise. I used a lot of Indian sculptures. All the sculptures we created for the Great Hall were all done by the Indians, who carve usually all the big totem poles. So there was a similarity there. They also used chainsaws, little chainsaws. A lot of the carving was done with chainsaws or whatever. We were using as much natural way as possible, and also because the terrain was especially in the rain, very muddy, very wet. It was better to use the real thing. And also you find out when you're out there and you start building scenery like you normally build on a stage, it doesn't last. And obviously you have to spend a lot of time painting it, aging it, and whatever. But being out there in the nature, it was all there. It helped you, and you were surrounded by it. And some of the parts of the set aged with it because of the sun, because of the rain. Especially for the greens department, we planted all the fields for the vegetables and everything. Of course, this had to work in with the schedule sometimes. Sometimes it worked. Some of the fields didn't make it. The time wasn't long enough. But after a while, the whole set grew and became part of your surroundings. Well, you can't have this in the studio. We didn't use any fiberglass. We didn't use anything fake. So even when they were shutting the big doors of the Great Hall, they had to lift a big piece of wood. And it actually showed it was not like somebody walking around with a fake piece of wood there. It was all for real. Outside for the defense in the front, it was all for real. And of course, then we burned it. We burned the whole village. In stages, we had to do it because you can't rebuild that a second time. It could cost you a fortune. We had to revamp it and rebuild some of the stuff for some other scenes. We also put a lake up there, or a pond, very large pond, where we had to put lining down first because the water otherwise would have gone away. But it was all for real. Everything was real.
And when you have a set that cost, I don't know, $30 million to build, the tendency of the people is just to shoot everything and to show the economical and financing power of the movie somehow. But he didn't do so. He built a set that was enormous, and sometimes he didn't show it. He just was doing just close-ups. And that set that was an enormous cost was in the background, out of focus. And so I suppose that didn't make very happy the producers, but in a way, he didn't make the movie cheap, because I think it's cheap when you try to show everything that you spend your money in. Ridley Scott, for example, shoots very much like that too. In Gladiator, you can see a lot of shots like that too, in enormous sets, and then the use of those sets are practically in the background, but you have the richness there. It's just calling you. It doesn't have to be so obvious.
I have obviously the usual complaint of a designer that you never see enough, but then if he would shoot everything, you know, we'd be still filming it now.
In the halls of Valhalla,
Where the brave may live forever.
We had everything. We had heat. We had really horrible weather, a lot of rain, cold. We had everything. You know, this is Vancouver Island is a wild place. I mean, this is where the Indians still have their long houses and everything. That's why it was also good to use the locals, because they knew how to work under those conditions. So it was very, very tough. But of course, for the actual shooting, a lot of rain was created, a lot of fog was created, all the fight scenes.
It was a very physically difficult movie, and it was 100 days, so that's a long time. Yeah, up in there, it was like a 45 minute to an hour drive for everybody into the woods to the set and come back out. But it was one of the most difficult films, I think, physically for all of us up there.
We were just shooting very early in the morning. It was very cold in Vancouver. I mean, yeah, in Victoria Island, in Campbell River. I had that kind of a fight with a guy on the beach. I think it was actually the first fight that the character has, and everybody just put attention to it because he already showed that he was very skillful with the horse. So that fight came on, and I defeat the guy. He wins, you know, my character, which opened the eyes of all the Vikings there. I had to transport this guy to one of the Viking boats, and I had to take him out from the ground and put him in the boat. And the guy was very heavy. And I think it was the third take or something like that. I just picked the guy, and I felt this little thing in my back. At the beginning, it was not even painful. It was like a little thing, very subtle, and he said, "What's that?" And 5 minutes after, I couldn't move. I literally couldn't move. I got an inflammation on my back, and so I bulged. That's what happened. I bulged one of the, discs in between fourth and fifth, I think, something like that. It just came out, and it was pinching my nerve, and it produced an unbelievable pain. I couldn't move, literally. So for a week, I didn't shoot. They just went around me, and they shot some other scenes with the Viking guys, and then they start sending people from Los Angeles and injecting me with everything, acupuncture, I don't know, ultrasounds, and at the end he came just to injections, for anesthesia. So I was working literally, you could hit me with a hammer, I wouldn't have feel it, because it was totally numb.
We shot one scene at the end of the movie when, we're being chased and the only escape was to jump underground and the underground stream, right? We end up in the sea, right? We shot that in Canada, but they didn't have time to shoot us coming up. So they shot that in Malibu. And the other water scene we shot in a made tank in British Columbia. Dennis Storhoy got stuck. When he went under, he was supposed to come out the other side. He almost drowned. Seriously, almost drowned.
And I don't know what went wrong there. Because the tunnel was not just a tunnel, it was actually a passage, but they has overtures on the side, built with mechanotubes and stuff like that. And so there is a moment that we take the decision to go in the movie as characters. So we look at each other and we take a big breath of air, and we go under the water. And I decided not to go. I said, because the water was very dirt, they couldn't see me. So I was just expecting there until I hear or I sense that it was time enough and I come out and probably cut, because they're not going to be shooting there water for a long time. So I did this, boom, and it went down. And I stayed there, attached to one thing that I found there, with my hands. But Dennis went. So I come out, they already cut it, and suddenly somebody screams on the other side, "Where is Dennis?" And I say, "He's on the other side. He's not here." And we start looking at each other, and then I see the wall of this cave, this pond there, moving. I said, oh my God. So I go under the water and I grab something and I feel this hand grabbing my arm. And I pull like this. And here comes Dennis. Gray. He didn't shoot for 3 days. He almost died. The experience that the guy lived there was unbelievable. We took him out of the water. He was like that with foam coming out of his mouth. And it was unbelievable. Unbelievable. We almost lost him.
We were all passionate about the project. And we shot it in the worst conditions in Canada. And I think when you go through something that heavy, it stays on the film. So when you see it, you feel it, you pick it up. It's like osmosis. The audience senses there's a real suffering going on here, or there's a real struggle going on. It's just there. It's not like a Hollywood film where, you know, whatever, some cute guy puts on a little wig and he waves a sword and we all go, ooh, wow, I'm really moved by that, yeah.
I don't think it was violent enough. I mean, this is a movie about hand-to-hand combat against uncivilized people who want to kill you a little, you know? So this is a violent film. It wasn't gratuitous. I don't think of it, if someone said, quickly categorize this movie, the word violent wouldn't be in the sentence. I would say intense action.
They wanted it to be PG-13 right from the beginning, which is a bit odd considering it's a movie about cutting iron cutting weapons. So I went to enormous lengths to shoot the thing in a PG-13 way, which is hard with swords. You know, it's easy with guns. You can shoot a gun and you just don't have to see the bullet go in. But swords, it's tough. Then the studio wanted to change the title, because the title was Eaters of the Dead, which I always thought was pretty cool. But they thought it was too dark and too scary. So we had a PG-13 movie and we found a lightweight title. But then they decided that the audience would think that the movie was not real enough, was not gritty enough, because it was PG-13. That people going to that movie wanted to see the R-rated version of that movie. So then we shot some kind of silly violence that didn't have much to do with the plot, and the movie could have done without it. It was just some gore to stick in the movie so that they could get themselves an R rating. It should have been R right from the beginning, and they should have left, and then I would have shot it in a very, very different way. And they should have left the title alone. But they outthought themselves once this way, and then once they realized the consequences of their outthinking themselves, then they turned the other way and clumsily backpedaled. I'm sorry. I'm not a big fan of the leadership that we received on that movie.
I'm not sure if it was more if we shot more blood than you actually saw, but I think the suspense leading up to the blood had been removed. So maybe that's what you're thinking. You're thinking, you know, maybe this was more violent, but I didn't see the blood, or I didn't see more heads chopped off. But I don't think so. But what you didn't see was the reason for the violence, the terror that leads up to these mysterious Wendells. You know, you didn't know, you weren't allowed to really get nervous, scared. The movie just went too fast for you to get into it. It's an epic picture. Why call it a 13th Warrior? So I asked Crichton. You know what he said? He said, well, you know, I was watering the grass in my house. He used to live off Montana in 17 in Santa Monica. I was watering my grass, and my neighbor says that he didn't think that Eaters of the Dead would be very good. It's too scary. It just sounds like a terrible horror movie. So we just changed it to the 13th Warrior. Because Banderas is the 13th. There's no arguing with Michael Crichton. It's his money, it's his idea, you know. But I just went, are you kidding me?
I am not a warrior. Very
to be longer. I wanted more. I think John's first cut was a little bit longer, and I think with some of those scenes, I think everybody would have sort of might have flowed a little bit more with some of John's cuts in there.
It's less than 10 minutes longer. Their principal problem was they insisted on doing test screenings on the movie in the San Fernando Valley. I couldn't get them to go anywhere else. They wouldn't go to New York. They wouldn't go outside of Southern California. And they got exactly the sort of reaction that one would expect if you tested the movie in Southern California. They went to the Galleria to test it. I mean, almost literally, they went to one of these giant shopping centers. And there was a lot of foreign language in it. There was a lot of stuff that would have played better if I could have gotten out of, if they hadn't selected that audience.
When we were shooting the reshoots a year later, and I was doing one ending with McTiernan and another ending with Crichton, we shot it on the same lot at Warner Brothers, and I would go from one studio set to the other studio set. And I would get stuff like one guy said, "Don't tell the other guy what you're doing here." And it was a little bit tragic because one day Crichton, we had become good friends. And he said, "Vladimir, it doesn't matter what you do over there, because I have Final Cut." And sure enough, his cut was the final cut. For better or for worse?
There's a duel at the end right now with a character who comes from nowhere that you never knew anything about. It was silly. But they wanted a duel. And they wanted to cut down the Arab sequences. They wanted to sort of hide the fact that he was Arab. And they wouldn't let me use Arab music in the score. And I was not thrilled with that.
More than anything, it was the mother was different. The look of the mother. John felt that the mother should be a grand matriarch, a big kind of a motherly, heavy set, you know what I mean, like the statue. Crichton felt that she should be attractive, or a little bit, you know. He felt that when I see her, I should get a little bit thrown off her beauty and everything. I actually agree with Crichton on the look of her. And I really did think that walking in with all those heads and then cutting her head off was well done. That was Crichton's cut. McTiernan's was similar, but it was a heavy character and it was darker, and I'm sure it would have worked if we did it, but we didn't, and I think the guys just ended like this because of that. When you think about it, it wouldn't matter which one it was, because it really wasn't about that moment, right? It was about everything else. So here I am getting my first big break, and these guys are acting like children. These brilliant guys are acting like children. I'm going, I cannot believe it. It was surreal to see what was happening. When I found out that they're not going to have a premiere for the film, that they don't care about it, they're going to toss it, and nobody's going to see it. And nobody saw it in the first 6 months. They only saw it later when it came out in DVD and tape and stuff. It was heartbreaking, because this was going to be a possible breakthrough for me and everybody else, not just me, everybody else in the film. Dennis Stroy could have become a huge star if this thing had been successful. So that was a heartbreak. That was the biggest heartbreak. The weakness is you got 13 characters that you don't develop fully. So when you start to lose them through the battles, you don't really care because you're not connected to them. And I made a suggestion, which unfortunately didn't happen, was we're on this boat. All you have to do is take a handheld camera, walk around the boat as you travel, and give each character 20 seconds. You know, like let's say this guy is a blacksmith, you know, or this guy is an archer, he makes archery equipment or whatever. And so when this guy dies, you go, oh, that's a blacksmith. Oh, that's too bad. It's a shame. But they never got that. So we lost a lot of characters in the first battle. You didn't know who they were. And I thought that was sad because we shot for 10 months. We had plenty of time to establish characters. There was a scene at the beginning with Dennis Stroy, Banderas, and Omar, where they're in the tent at the beginning. And in the morning they wake up, and before the little boy comes, and they're passing around this bowl and washing their faces in this bowl, and they're blowing their noses in it. And then they get to Banderas. And, you know, he's supposed to wash himself, but he's seen all the other guys were blowing their nose into the bowl. So he just, and so they cut the scene there. But what happened after was Dennis Stroy was speaking Norwegian. He said it in Norwegian. He said something in Norwegian. And Banderas goes, what is he saying? And Omar translated, he goes, don't Arabs believe in cleanliness? And it was really cute. It was really sweet. And it would have tied that scene together as opposed to just cutting it off at passing of the ball. So I'm pretty sure that was probably from Mr. Crichton's decision to make things go faster. Michael's cut is just very simplistic version of life. And McTiernan's cut is a very deep, multi-layered version of life. See, the thing about McTiernan is, you know, to me, film is called motion picture. And so you let the motion and the picture tell a story. I think a guy like Crichton, who's a writer, he's a literal person. So he wants the story told, spoken all the time. And if there's no speaking, no telling, he, I think, maybe was uncomfortable. Whereas McTiernan trusts the pauses and the moments that will tell a deeper story than the words. And it was heartbreaking to see him lose that cut because it was a beautiful cut. It's just beautiful.
There's a director's cut that is different in several ways, but I can't claim that it's you know, that there was a magnificent movie that's sitting in a can somewhere. There were many things. I'd put the Arabs back in, and I'd put the Arab music back in, and there were a lot of other small scenes. Differences maybe 5 minutes. Maybe it's better leaving it as a myth.
Goodbye, Arab! Goodbye, Northman.
Because I did Zorro, the first one before the 13th Warrior, I didn't have that conversation with Martin Campbell, but I had it actually years after when I did the second Zorro. And he said to me, that is a very underrated movie. And, but you know, that's actually him was the one who said to me, but it's becoming a cult movie. Just look for it on these websites and stuff like that. Look what the people are saying about that. So it's true. I look for that, and that's how I start realizing, oh, look at the people following this movie. It's interesting, you know, how the movie developed into something that probably was not pretending to be at the time that we were shooting it. You know, I mean, it was supposed to be a big, huge blockbuster. It did okay in America, but never filled the expectations of what the studio was expecting. It did in Europe, though, but not in the country that the movie was made. Sometimes it happens, I guess. You know, I mean, movies that are done at its time, and then just start finding his public, his audience, years after. Who knows? Maybe that movie is going to be analyzed someday. People are going to look at it again and going to say, there's something interesting about this.